Hello. It's a great pleasure to be in conversation with the poet Malika Booker, which on and off I have been doing for the last decade or so. And tonight, Malika is going to read her poem Nine Nights, which was shortlisted for the Forward Prize a few years ago. But before she does, Malika, can I just ask you to explain to us what the nine nights of the title are?
Yes, so Nine Nights is a Caribbean wake tradition. When someone dies, you usually have 9 nights, the 9 nights wake, where people go to the house for 9 nights, and sometimes it goes on for 40 nights. And there are various things that you do on each night to support the family, to celebrate, to mourn, to pray, and all different things, and things happens on different nights. So the poem is called Nine Nights because it's imagining if Lazarus was brought back to life in the Caribbean, and it was in the middle of the 9 night the 9 night wake.
Which is very much why we have asked you to read it as part of this Ely Cathedral series exploring Lent and Easter. It belongs now in the year. So with no further ado, Nine Nights.
Thank you very much. 9 nights, the setup. If you did see people that first night, people for so who come from town, from far like St. David, from near like St. Mark's, to see this little St. John parish. It had the makings of a good funeral. Pure bus park up by Guelph roadside like ants. Their mourners arrived, shuffling with the shock. The priest opened up that wake with plenty prayers. Corn soup bubbled in the iron pot. Red beans slowly converged with rice, thyme, and coconut milk. Chairs clustered like fowls in the yard, till his mother fell down under the weight of her dead son. So young, she muttered, so young. Song. Grief song is a different story. A clap of hands, then a rocking back and forth story. Grief song is a body dancing to a jagged melody story. Grief song is so searing, it's the belly drops to knees story. Grief song is the way his mother sinks into the arms of Rock of Ages story. I tell you, grief song is a hard to tell story because grief song is a different story. The dreams. Martha had dreams for so since the night he dead, and wise woman Clarice could not make head nor tail of flying fish and humming birds over rough river water, of Edo swelling on the rocky soil, of septic tank full of bleach and blue soap. What does it mean? She muttered. What does it mean? Funeral announcement. To hear his name called dry so on radio was the son of, brother of, left behind, broke her up like razor scraping against her skin. And them dotish dogs sprawl off, howling a relentless dirge for their master, who never pelt them with kick, who boil one fresh pot of dog food, chicken neck with gravy and white rice every morning like greeting. Them dogs howl so till grief lock off the windpipe. His resurrection. Well, when Lazarus fasts up and step cross the threshold of his own wake, rank with corpse stink, the wake broke up. Who put foot out of door quick time? Who start pray fast, fast? Who faint and get revive with smelling salts? Miss Gibbs forget she hips bad till she take 2 steps and fall brat-up. Mr. Power start moan about the good money he dash away on funeral frock for Betty. And now she can't even use it. Uncle Johnny start fling rum, shouting, "You're dead, man! You're dead!" Like libation have any power over the resurrected. Vexation. It had the makings of a boss funeral, mourners muttered, sulking into Wake's shadow. Martha stoops over and over like chant. Her venomous kiss teeth, terrifying, even tough back, crapple. Mary vex, too bad. How he could go and make their serious work of grief into a pappy show. Mary's head get hot. Look how much white candle he mother burn to light he way. And how, like stubborn jackass, he refuse to follow instruction. Just turn away from the light, bold face. So this was just like when he was hard as to leave his mother womb. The old choir women in the back room stopped singing and only cussing bad word, wild at the shame and slander of this thing. Fling down party. Lazarus dash away hymns and cuss words from his house with the heavy bass of a thumping speaker box. The floorboards start tremble as his foot rise up and skip, as his fingers lick and clap when the Rasta man chant, take over, give thanks. Lazarus dance, fire and brimstone. Dance, chant down Babylon. Start lick his fist on the fragile board wall. Start shout, more fire, as if alive scatter springs into his steps, as if alive shake up his mind. He locks swinging like thick twine tied to air, and he chanting, I and I liberty. I and I liberty. Geography of resurrection. And when the reporter woman asked Lazarus what it was like as they sat in the cream wall room with the hum of mosquitoes. And he say, there's a chart to being resurrected, an atlas that have mud swamp, sweet water river, and thorny paths. There's a 1 foot in front of another chart, a believe and it shall be chart, a surrender chart, a rhythm chant chart, and you just have to trod it all, rude girl. You just have to trod it. The laying of hands. And when they saw he still lived to this 9th day, they cancelled La Croix funeral parlor, grab he up in a white sheet, tote him, swinging like he in a rocking hammock to the seashore, and roll him in coarse, hot sand. Then dunk he head in the salty sea, washing death's stench off him. Then they anointed him, all palms seeking to touch their feeble miracle. Thank you.
The hair is up on the back of my neck. Can you tell us how you came to make this different story out of a very old story?
So I'm working on a project which is I've been working on it for a long time, because it's hard to make the imaginary leaps. But I'm imagining what it would be like if the biblical landscape, the people and the culture and the characters were set in the Caribbean. What would that mean? And what would that evoke around Caribbean history, colonization, its rituals? And so I was speaking to my mom, and my mom was at an age where a lot of her friends were dying, you know? It's that age where you're losing your friend one by one. But I was struck by the fact that when she went to the funerals and when she spoke to me, she would speak about the funeral, the people who were there, what they were wearing, what they did, who ate 4 plates of food, you know, what the church women did, who didn't want prayers in their house, so they were mad. And it was just this whole community thing and the whole socialization around the wake. And at the time, you know, I was working on 2 projects. I was working on a project on funerals and stop one day, and then 2 days later I'd say, okay, I'm going to work on the project around the Bible. And I don't know why, but I was sitting at my desk and they kind of became one, because I thought, my God, what happens if Lazarus, you know, turned up in the middle of the wake, you know, after they'd had a few days of the wake? What happens if Lazarus was resurrected into a Caribbean wake? What would the response be? And I was also thinking about the response in the Bible as well, you know, by his sisters and by people. And I stuck on this bit that they said the stench of the corpse. So that's kind of a kind of amalgamation of what went into the making of that.
I'm noticing things in the Lazarus story I'd never noticed before when it comes to me in the form of your poem. I'm noticing, for example, that it's a story of liberation, because defeating death is overthrowing kind of all the power that hold people down. So Lazarus's joy is a kind of liberation joy. But I'm also noticing that that it's incredibly inconvenient when he turns up, and that the scandal is real too. That his joy is immediate, but his family's joy is a lot more complicated.
Yes, yes. It felt like everyone had invested. And I was thinking of not Lazarus awakening, but I was thinking about that space with Jesus, with Mary and Martha,
Mm-hmm.
and the different reactions of them. And I was thinking about the sometimes in the gospel, the disbelief that Jesus's miracles are met with.
Yeah.
And the notions that some of what Jesus actions, especially in places like the temple, are kind of radical and overthrowing the status quo. So for me, it felt like the way my mom tells those stories, if the person came back, the investment that had happened by the fourth day or by a certain day in it, I don't think people would be like, oh yeah, I'm happy to have you back. It was one of the first poems that I chuckled writing it. It was very vivid. I could see it. I could see the drama, and I could see the lack of belief, and I could see the prayer women are always older, and they're the ones who are very conservative and know exactly what prayer to do and how you must dress. And they're the ones that give the rules, especially if someone young has died to someone who's never done a funeral before. They're like the keepers of the knowledge. So it's overthrowing a lot of the people's roles, a lot of the norms, and what happens when ritual is interrupted.
Yeah, no, it's got to be a story of disruption, of all of the kind of precious ritual ways in which people handle the ordinary transition from life into death, which does not come back again usually. So yeah, it's a story of disruption. It's a story of liberation, and it is very funny the way you do it. Did you know it was going to be a funny poem when you started it, or did the chuckles come on you gradually?
Well, the interesting thing is, one of my friends, Roger Robinson, had said to me a few weeks before that I'm usually very funny, but my poems are very heart-wrenching and very just very raw and very visceral. And so I'd been trying to write a very a poem that was lighthearted. But I didn't know. I just sometimes it starts with a question: what would happen if Lazarus came back into this? But it's as I started writing it, particularly when it got to the bit where they reacted to a dead person coming into the room, that's when I started chuckling, and that's when the writing kind of took over itself, because it was just like, it was just these characters were popping up going, I bought this really good dress for her and she's not going to be able to wear it to the funeral. And, and the one that really made me chuckle was libation, because, at the beginning of every wake ceremony, you throw some rum and some spirits on the floor for the dead, for the ancestors. And sometimes when people reminisce halfway through, they throw spirits on the floor. And then I was struck by, I grew up Catholic. So the idea of, the chalice, when people are blessing, and the idea of, the holy water. In the Caribbean, sometimes the holy water was done when I was small, with a leaf in the water to sprinkle on and so the idea of this man trying to do libation for someone who is alive, that's the only poem I've ever, and that's the closest I think I've come to comedy. I've not been able to get comedy or get anything funny again in that way, but that was the best part of it for me.
I have to say, I think this one is visceral and heart-wrenching as well as funny. I don't think you can stop doing the visceral by the sound of it. Okay, there is one obvious absence in this poem, which is that the figure of Jesus himself is not in here. It's a miracle without a miracle doer. Presumably you did that because of where you want the spotlight to be, and what you want us to be concentrating on in this poem.
Yeah, I think, sometimes in the
Sorry.
middle of, yeah, no, but sometimes in the middle of writing, the poem takes over and decide what it's going to be. I just had this question, and I didn't know I was playing to get into it. I was thinking, well, you have grief song. I was reading Kai Miller's book, The Cartographer Writes His Way into Zion. I've just mangled that thing. And so I was reading this stuff. Sometimes when I'm reading, I'm stuck. I'm reading around people's poems to get where I am. And the only question I was trying to answer is, what would happen if Lazarus comes back into the wake? And I think poems are very much compressed and very much like a camera light on what the poem is showcasing. And so in that space, it wasn't Martha or Mary's space. It was the spectators, and it was the ritual space in the setup, what happens, and then it was the interruption of the ritual, and then it was Lazarus' story all the way, in a way. And Lazarus getting to be in his resurrection, because we kind of know Lazarus is resurrected, but then I don't really remember knowing what happens to Lazarus after that.
I don't think we ever find out. It's
No.
his coming back to life is it, as far as the Bible is concerned. One of the things I notice as well, from the poem, is that, and it makes me realize that, I mean, your version is clearly specific. It's set in a place and a time, and in a culture. But one of the things it reminds me is that all our versions of this story are culturally specific. There isn't, in fact, there isn't an original. They're all translations. Anything that isn't the Bible is equally a translation. Lazarus doesn't speak King James Bible English any more than he speaks Caribbean English. They're all translations. It's a world of translations when it comes to this story.
Yeah, and the book I'm in conversation with is the St. James Bible.
Yeah, always that one. Why that particular Bible?
It's so beautifully lyrically.
I mean, because it's so Caribbean one.
Yeah, well, it's beautiful as a poet linguistically, and also it's all over the Caribbean, the King James. I didn't know when I came over here that Catholics didn't use the King James Bible, because in every household there's a King James Bible. They're actually, so it's said that if you're sleeping and you hear your name called in your sleep, it's usually the dead calling you or the devil. So have your King James Bible by the side of your bed and put your hand on it and say, I rebuke you, and say the 23rd Psalm. And that's one of the kind of I don't know, little things that about dealing with life and death in the Bible. Most of the quotes, we have this character in Trinidad called the Midnight Robber. And the Midnight Robber is a carnival character, and is the only carnival character that talks. And he's an orator. And he says, when I was born, the nights turned red, and, the world stopped. And he pulls from Genesis, and they pull from Shakespeare, and they pull in its language. So it's actually the language of and also, my forefathers who were first there, it was forbidden for them to read. And some of them wanted to read the Bible, and some people's first learning to read was the Bible. Also, some of the rebellions came out of religious movements with the Bible involved. But the King James, I thought the King James was the name of the Bible for a long time in my childhood, because people said, do you have your King James? Or I see your King James. Or people had their family tree in their King James. They had all the others. They had the New English Bible and everything else, but there was the King James.
It's a mixed inheritance, though, isn't it? Because it came as part of a package with colonialism and slavery and tyranny. So the life of the Bible is, it faces in many directions then in the Caribbean.
Yes, and so it was the book used to justify slavery, especially people. A lot of the preachers at that time were displaying the people who were in the Caribbean as the people of Ham. It also is a book that the Rastas use part of it in terms of that Exodus. In terms of the fact that people could see themselves in that Exodus story. There were people who were taken from their land and were in the land and being oppressed. So sometimes some of those can be seen in it. And some of my thing is, as a young girl growing up, there were some passages that which I'm able to address and speak back to, which I had problems with, which was the representation of women, in the Bible. When women came up, they were a footnote. I remember I asked my mom, how can there be all this begatting if women have babies and it's all men begatting? Is begatting mean that they're the parents? Where are the mummies in the begatting? So I think from that age, I was asking these fundamental questions. So this creative project enables me to navigate all that, to explore that, to see how, to just explore that and to look at things like that.
I was going to ask, what about you? How do you situate yourself in relation to it? But I think you've just answered that. At this point, I think we should probably stop recording, just with a note that Malika will be back with another poem next week, also as part of the Lenten Easter exploration. But I think we'll stop recording now, say thank you very much, and then, in a very unfair way that excludes anybody else who might be listening, we'll get to ask Malika more questions. But thank you for now.